Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's session. My name is Danny, and I'm the event planner for the New York Reactor space. Before we start, I have a few things to go over. Please take a moment to read our code of conduct. We seek to provide a respectful environment for both our audience and presenters. We encourage engagement in the chat, but please be mindful of your commentary, remain professional, and on topic. Useful links will be shared in the chat. The session is recorded and will be available on demand 24 to 48 hours on the Microsoft Reactor YouTube channel. Which brings us to today's session. It'll run for approximately 1 hour with time for questions throughout. I will now turn it over to our speaker for introductions.
Welcome, everyone. I'm Pamela from Python Cloud Advocacy.
And I'm Josh from Python Cloud Advocacy as well. Yep. Welcome to our RAG Hack live streams, our last one. Just for those who haven't been able to join us yet, RAG Hack is a free global hackathon happening from September 3rd to 16th. If you haven't been able to catch any of our live streams, all of them are recorded. So you can go back to the AKA link at the top of the screen, aka.ms/raghack, and you can take a look at our session schedule there.
Sweet. All right. So now we're going to go into today's session about evaluations. So let me go ahead and get that one up. So we are going to be talking about evaluating a RAG chat application and different approaches that we can use for evaluation. And I thought this was a nice topic to have at the end of RAG Hack because it's the kind of thing that you do, once you've got your prototype up and you're feeling good about it, then you start thinking about how do you evaluate it. So that's how we're going to finish up our RAG Hack. So just to review, RAG is a technique to get an LLM to answer questions based off data. A very simple RAG flow is shown here where a user asks a question. We use that question to search a database. We send the results and the question to the large language model, and we get a response that has citations. So that is, the simplest RAG flow, and we can get more advanced than that as we've seen in many of the sessions. Now, when we get these RAG answers, we want to know, are they good answers, right? And what does it mean for a RAG answer to be a good answer, to be high quality, right? So the first most obvious thing is the answer correct? And not only is it like absolutely correct, like is it correct, according to the whole world, but is it correct relative to this knowledge base, right? So if I ask the question, what does a product manager do? And I asked that, in the Microsoft chat versus like the Google chat, the answers might actually be slightly different because a product manager at Microsoft may have a slightly different role than a product manager at Google, right? So we want that answer to be correct relative to this knowledge base because we're building a RAG application. We want everything to be grounded in this particular knowledge domain. We also want the answers to be clear and understandable. And usually they are if you're using a good model and you're using a reasonable temperature value. So that's, I haven't had too many issues with that. And then finally, we want them to be formatted in the desired manner, right? So we want the tone to be correct, like, the kind of level of conversationality we want. We want the length to be, a certain length, right? So we might want short answers. We might want long answers. We might want kind of medium length answers, right? So we're probably looking for a particular length that works well for our audience. And most importantly is we want the citations to be formatted correctly, right? So if you look at these three answers here, these are three possible answers to the same question, right? So this one's pretty short. This one's the longest. And then this one is short, but also contains a citation inside square brackets to the source. So the only one of these answers that I consider to be high quality is the last one. That's the one that I want to see for my application because it's the correct length, it's the correct answer, and it has the correctly formatted citation. And so then in my app UI, I'll be able to pull out that citation and then link people to that, file so they can open it in the browser and get more information. So that's the kind of correctness that we're looking for here. And the thing is that there are so many things that affect the quality of these RAG answers, right? It's almost overwhelming how many things affect the quality, right? So here we just have a simple RAG flow. This is basically the simplest RAG flow. And even in the simple RAG flow, there is so many parameters, right? So, the first step we have is the document search, right? And so there, what database are we using? Are we using AI search? We're doing Cosmos, Postgres, pgvector, right? Lots of options there for what search engine we're using. And then with each of our search engines, we're going to have options as well, right? Like with AI search, okay, are we doing hybrid search using both vector and full text? Are we using a re-ranking model to re-rank the answers? Are we, how many different answers are we retrieving? How did we prepare our data originally, right? Did we chunk it up into 500 tokens with 25% overlap, right? And all those things can affect the search results, right? So a lot goes into getting great search results. And really, to me, like, probably the most important part of a RAG is the retrieval step. If you can get great search results, you typically can get a great answer from the LLM. So that is worth spending a lot of time looking at those factors that affect quality. And then we do have the LLM step, right? So here we have the LLMs that actually is answering according to the sources in the question. So there, what matters is what system prompt are we sending the LLM? Are we sending conversation history? Are we sending few shot examples? What model are we using? Is it 3.5? Is it 4.0? Is it 0.1? Right? What temperature are we using? From like 0 to 1. You can even go to 2 now, but do not do that, right? So, some reasonable temperature value. I usually use like 0.3 for RAG personally. If we set a max tokens, a top P, all the parameters that you can set for an LLM, those can affect the quality as well. And so in my experience, like some of these things affect the quality more than others, right? So for search, using hybrid plus re-ranker, like that gets vastly better results than, just vector, just full text. And then for like the LLM step, for me, the biggest difference is just the model, right? If I change from 3.5 to 4, I'm going to see a big jump in quality. Other things can have effects, but I think you'll start to see as you run evaluations is that some of these factors will matter more than others. So how do you experiment and try and figure out what parameters are the best? Now, the first thing you might want to do is actually manual experimentation, right? Like in your code or in your app. So, for an example of manual experimentation, I do have our open source RAG with AI search sample open here, right? And in this sample, I can mess with the code, but I can also change a lot in this developer settings dialog here. So we've put all this stuff in the dialog because these are the common things that people want to change, right? So I might want to change the system prompt and I could override the entire system prompt here. I could change the temperature that we use the LM. I was saying 0.3 is generally pretty good. But I could try higher or lower temperature values. I could set the seed. This is a really important one for experimentation. Here's the thing. If you don't set the seed, then you can get slightly different output each time, or actually very different output each time, right? Because it's a probabilistic process. But if we set the seed, right, and it can be any number, right? So I'll just set it like to 1. That means every time I send the request, as long as everything else is the same, like all the searches are the same, I should get back the same response. So if you are doing experimentation where you're looking at quality, you're going to want to set that seed, because otherwise what's happening is that you're going to see differences between the runs and you're going to attribute that to something else you changed, but you don't really know if the difference was due to this other thing you changed or just the fact that generally there are differences, probabilistically between calls to an LLM. So you really want to set that seed if you're actually looking at answer quality. And you might choose to always set the seed in an application, just maybe to give yourself more predictability. And, that's kind of up to you, like how much variance you want to allow. Let's see, we have things like score thresholds for the results that come back from search, how many things we want to retrieve, right? So we usually retrieve 3, but you might go up to like 10 or something like that. And there's other search options here. And there's the retrieval mode, are we using hybrid? So those are the sort of things we can mess with here, right? So here I mostly just changed, actually, I'll show you a temperature of 2 just for funsies. So let's see what happens in a performance review. Okay, I think I just killed it. Wait, let me check the logs. Okay, my access token expired. All right, I should always just re-log in before before my demo. Let me just relog in here. Okay, that's done. All right, I'll restart that app, and that will take a little bit. Yeah, good question from Antonio. Not all models support seed, right? Yeah, so this is actually a question I asked in the last session to Facundo, because Facundo was showing us all the different models from the Azure AI models catalog. And I asked him, was like, well, do all of these support seed? And he said, yeah, some of them do, some of them don't. So if the model supports seed, all the OpenAI models support seed as far as I know. If the model supports seed, you definitely want to use seed. And if they don't, well, then you're just going to want to keep that in mind, right? So what I would recommend is that if you are evaluating a process and your LLM doesn't use seed, you're probably going to want to run the same evaluations multiple times to make sure that you kind of see the variance across runs, right? Like, so you just keep in mind that there are differences there. So generally, it's going to be harder to evaluate when we're using a model that doesn't allow us to set the seed. But if you keep that in mind, then you could, kind of just do multiple runs to get a feel for overall what's the average behavior, average performance of it, right? Yeah, that's a great point. I've been spoiled by the OpenAI models and their seed. All right, let's try this now. This should be sending a request. Okay. All right. And so this is what happens when you do temperature 2. I don't know if you've ever done it before, but don't do it. It's a bad idea. So let's do something more reasonable, right? Well, so another thing is, like, when you're doing manual experimentation, just change one thing at a time, right? So here, maybe you change the number of search results, right? So I'll say, like, okay, let's get 10 search results. So, generally set the seed, change one thing at a time, try it out a few times and see what you're observing, right? So this is a reasonable answer here. Another thing is, if you're doing manual evaluation, you need to understand the data. So the data I'm using here is actually this, like, sample data we made up. So that's why I also deployed a RAG using the same code, but on my personal blog, because I know the data on my personal blog because I wrote that data, right? I wrote those blog posts. So when I ask a question, I know if it's a good answer or not, because I've been there, I've written it, right? So here I can, like, change, like, so here I'll change the temperature to 0.7 and say, where did Pamela attend high school? Okay, let's see. And so when I get the answers back on this one, it's a lot easier for me to instantly know whether it's good answer or not. Because here's the thing: is that, remember that LLM answers tend to be pretty persuasive, right? So they can be persuasively wrong. So if you don't know the data, you might be misled to think, like, oh, this was a good answer. In this case, this one was actually a good one. Let's see. Does Pamela have a child? Let's see. It's doing a pretty good job, actually. It's admitting when it doesn't know. So let's ask something that I had no, like, how to deploy a fast API app to Azure, right? My blog covers a lot of random things. And this was a good answer here too. And this was based off of a blog post about fast API on Azure, right? So then I could try other settings and see the effect. So just things to keep in mind with manual experimentation, right? Set the seed, change one thing at a time, and know your data. Don't get misled by LLMs. So now let's talk about automated evaluation, because here's the thing: you might come up with this, like, amazing system prompt and be like, oh man, this system prompt, like, really improved the answers that I saw locally. Like, this is definitely the best system prompt. And I've had people come to me and say, like, hey, I came up with a better system prompt for this app. And I'm like, okay, well, let's evaluate it, right? And you really need to run evaluations on a lot of questions. Because if you only evaluate a few questions, like, 3 questions, 5 questions, whatever, you might see better results for those 5 questions. But those 5 questions do not represent all the many, the many questions that could be asked of your data that users might ask. So you really want to be running evaluations in bulk on a lot of things. And there, of course, we're going to need a form of automated evaluation, right? Because we can't reasonably manually check 200 different questions, right? So this is another thing to keep in mind, is that you might be happy with your results from manual experimentation. Do not rely on those. Take those into the next step and say, okay, I saw good results from changing this parameter for a few examples. Now let's do some automated evaluation and see if those results actually apply to the large data set. So there are multiple evaluation SDKs out there. For Python, there's DeepEval, there's Ragas. I think LangChain has evaluators. So there's many different evaluation tools out there. The most important thing is to use something, right? This is like, we're like in the early days of, when we first figured out we really need to test software, right? We're kind of in the early days here, and we're figuring out what works and figuring out all the, what tools everyone's going to be using. So the important thing is to, find some sort of evaluation framework that you like, or, or just that you come up with yourself, and to actually use it, right? So here I am using the Promptflow Evals SDK. This is from Microsoft. And so, it's a Python package that I can install here. And it comes with a bunch of built-in evaluators. And these evaluators are actually using an LLM to evaluate the results from your RAG application, or your LLM tool, any AI app that you're building, right? And it's funny because we're using an LLM to judge an LLM, but there's a lot of research into it, and it turns out to be like a pretty decent way to judge the result from an LLM. Like they can reason about it pretty well. So let me actually run the code for this one. Okay. All right. So, let's say I want to evaluate my RAG answer quality, right? So here I've got a really basic RAG setup. So I've got like Azure AI Search and Azure OpenAI. And, I take the user question, I get the embedding for the question, I use that to search my AI search index. Then I get back the sources and combine them. And then I send, the user question and the sources along with the system message that says, hey, you got to answer with these sources. You got to provide citations this way. And then get back a response, right? So here, this is the product manager question. So you can see we get a response. It has a lot of nice citations in square brackets, just like I asked. And so this looks like a pretty good response just from a first glance. So now I've got that answer. I've got the question. I've got the sources. With that, I can then do some evaluation, right? So here I'm bringing in the Promptflow Evals SDK and using 2 of the built-in evaluators. So we've got the groundedness and the relevance. So I set up my, OpenAI connection to, point at my Azure OpenAI account. And I say, okay, I need a relevance evaluator and I need a groundedness evaluator. And now for the relevance evaluator, it is taking in, actually, I don't think it needs the context. I think we could probably delete that, but here, let me see. All right, so let's see, run this. Getting another response here. Okay. And then run this. So what you can see is that I'm passing in things to the evaluators, and they're actually going to be passing those to an LLM and say, hey, here's this question, here's this answer, what do you think of the result? Oh, I got the Azure CLI. Sometimes the Azure CLI times out inside notebooks for some reason when it tries to get it. Okay, there we go. So this time it worked. So it graded them both on 5. So I think that we don't need, let me try it with this. Oh, it does want it. All right. Okay, fine. Okay. So each of the evaluators require different things to be passed in. So relevance actually requires the question, answer, and the context. So relevance is trying to decide, is this answer relevant? Like the stuff in this answer, is it relevant to the question? The groundedness actually doesn't care about the question. It only looks at the answer in the context, and it judges, hey, is this answer grounded in this context, right? So it's not saying whether the answer is necessarily correct, just saying, did this answer come from this context? Because, you know, LLMs have lots of information in their weights, so they might be given a bunch of sources and come up with a reasonable sounding answer, but then that reasonable sounding answer might be based from what's in their weights versus the sources. So groundedness tries to measure, like, okay, it looks like the answer actually was based off the sources. So we'll just run that again. So what you saw was both of them got a score of 5. We generally ask for the actual prompt is a score between 1 to 5. And let me actually just show you, I'll just show you the prompt for them. I have the prompt. Let's see. I do have the prompts available. I'll just show you in the actual SDK itself so you can see how I find these things out, right? So we go to the SDK and we look for groundedness evaluator. Okay. All right. And we can see this is the groundedness evaluator. And we can find its prompt. So its prompt is in here. So its prompt is a Prompty file. If you went to any of the previous ones about Prompty, you may have learned about this, but Prompty is basically a file format, which is a convenient way of describing prompts and being able to test out calls and prompts to LLMs. So it starts off with some YAML that describes like metadata about it, like, okay, this is what this prompt does. Here's the kind of model configuration that we recommend, right? Notice it's using a temperature of 0, right? Because you do not want much creativity when it comes to judging. You just want accuracy. You want the best response, right? So we're using this temperature of 0. Max tokens 1, because we literally just want a single number back. And then, some other parameters here. So here you can see this is literally what is sent to the LLM, right? It says, okay, you're going to be presented a context and an answer. You need to give it a score from 1 to 5 based on whether it's grounded. Here's a bunch of examples, right? So we can see all these examples. And these are what this one gets a 5, this one gets a 5, this one gets a 1, right? So you can start to see how you could actually build your own GPT evaluations using a really similar thing. Like the idea is you just give the LLM whatever information it needs, say, hey, I want a score from 1 to 5, and then give them a bunch of examples of what would be a 1, what would be a 2, what would be a 3, what would be a 4, what would be 5, right? And then it can decide. And so we generally consider 5 to be passing and also consider 4 to be passing. So if we see a 4 or 5, it's like, okay, that's pretty good. And then if we see anything lower than 4, then we're like, okay, well, that kind of failed that evaluation. So that is how we can use those built-in evaluators from Promptflow Evals. I'll show you later how you can build your own evaluators too. And just to show the ones we have available, right? Like it just depends on what you're going to be checking, right? So we saw groundedness. Groundedness is checking to see whether, actually that one, let me get that in the right place. This should actually be over here. There we go. Yeah. There we go. All right. So yeah, groundedness is saying like, okay, how does the answer relate to the context? And then we have ones that relate to the question and the answer. So there's relevance, right? Is the answer relevant to the question? There's also coherence and fluency. I usually don't use those because generally I find that my LLM responses are always coherent and always fluent, but those are things you could consider. That might be relevant, especially if you're, maybe operating in non-English, like in a language that LLMs aren't as trained in. And then there's also ones that compare the answer to ground truth. So ground truth is if you know exactly what the right answer is, that's the ground truth, right? You're like, if somebody says, what does a PM do? And they're asking for our company, this is exactly what the right answer should be. And these are the citations they should use. So if you have ground truth for a particular question answer pair, then you can run evaluators that will actually compare answer to ground truth. So the similarity evaluator is a GPT evaluator. So it'll actually ask the LLM to compare how similar two answers are. And then there's another one that's called F1 score, and that's actually using a different thing. It's using, like, I think some tokenization and math to come up with a score of how similar two things are. I find both of them to be a bit tricky to use because, even if something, what does it mean to be similar, right? Is it syntactically similar or is it semantically similar? Something might seem really, really similar, but there's one thing that's, off, that's wrong. So I actually personally don't use any of the similarity comparisons here, but I do have other metrics that I use to compare answer to ground truth. So I'll show them later. But these are the ones that are built in to the Promptflow Evals SDK that you could consider using for evaluating your responses. Now, as I was saying, you really want to do bulk evaluation, right? And one way that you can do that is that they do provide this evaluate function in Promptflow evals that will take in ground truth data, like a bunch of question answer pairs with, with their ground truth. Then, which evaluators you want to use. You want relevance, you want groundedness, do you want similarity? Optionally take in an Azure AI project for uploading results, and then optionally take in an output path to output results into a JSON. And so that would run the evaluators on every thing in that data, that JSON lines file here. And then if you did specify Azure AI project, then it would get uploaded to the evaluation tab in Azure AI Studio, and you'd be able to see, like, okay, for this run, this was, we see like an average score of 3.2 for fluency, 2.95 for coherence, right? You would see all your average scores, like how many things got 4 or 5 versus less than that. And then you could be able to, like, keep all your evaluation runs there over time, which is really nice because then you could, like, share your studio with other people and they could see the results as well. Another way you could do it is that you could take the results from that evaluate call and you could, save them in your repo. You could display them in GitHub Actions. So this was an example from one of our repos. Let me open this up over here. And so you can see here that this evaluate workflow runs, and it's actually calling a script that is using the same SDK, and you can actually see even the results here that look similar to what I was doing. This one is only running on 3 questions, right? So this is more of like a gut check, like a smoke test type thing, which is like, okay, has anything gone horribly wrong, right? So this would be a reasonable evaluation to potentially run on every change to that would affect RAG quality, right? Or actually maybe every change to your repo, right? Like maybe every change to your repo you run an evaluation on just three QA pairs, just as a smoke test to see, like, has anything gone really wrong. I wouldn't use this to decide whether a particular parameter is better or worse because it's not enough detail. But this is a good, like, smoke test to say, like, okay, is anything super wrong, right? Here we can see we're getting 5s for all of them, and so that's nice, right? So you can see here what the scores are. You could compare that over time. For this one, it did actually get a 1 here. I don't know if it often does because this one's not my repo, but that's something you can keep in mind, right? So something that, because you want to think about evaluations, GPT evaluations, they cost money, right? So you don't want to just run GPT evaluations willy-nilly. You want to, like, be really thoughtful about when you're going to run these evaluations, and when are you going to run the evaluation on just a couple QA pairs? When are you going to run it on like 200 QA pairs? So that you're just using your resources judiciously. I see there's some questions. So from Yana, the question is, as a context, you're sending all found chunks. What if there was a needed chunk but it wasn't found? The evaluator wouldn't know about it, right? Yeah. So that's right. So when we did this evaluation here, right? So we got back, certain sources from this Azure AI search. In this case, we asked for 5. And there might have been a relevant chunk if we had, a more relevant chunk if we had asked for 10. and you know, and it doesn't know about that. So we are not here. We aren't really measuring. We're not truly measuring retrieval score. That's another thing you could measure. Is if you knew what, you know, and this would be like another data set. If you knew, okay, for the question, what does the product manager do? We should get documents X, Y, and Z. And if we don't get X, Y, and Z, then you know, then that's a lower retrieval score. So that's definitely a really good thing to measure. And if you can measure retrieval score independently, then that's a really good thing to do, because that's, you know, that really narrows down on the issue of trying to improve the, you know, recall and precision of your search, right? So you want to ideally get all the results that are relevant, and you want for all the results that are relevant to also not contain any irrelevant irrelevant results. So that's recall and precision. So there are other mechanisms that you can use for measuring retrieval. For inspiration, you could check out this blog post that was looking at retrieval scores, and they talk about the techniques that they use. There's something called NDCG, which is one way of measuring it, and you can see recall and stuff like that. But definitely, if you can measure retrieval score independently, it is a really, really important thing to be able to measure. Because then you can tweak that search step without even having to, make an expensive call to LLM and like really, really optimize that search step, right, and figure it out. Great question. So then Anamtron asks, if we use an OpenAI model as a judge, do you think it might be a bit biased towards OpenAI models because their writing styles could be similar? It's a good question. I don't know if there's any research about this. That's a really good question. Yeah, it's a good question. I don't know if anyone's seen any research about that. Please do share that, and if I'll ask afterward. I can post in the discussion thread if I find out anything about that. And then Antonio says, following up on that question, would it be interesting to use more than one model to evaluate the questions? I mean, if you have the budget to try using more than one model to evaluate the questions, it probably will be interesting. Honestly, anytime you change any parameter and do evaluations, you learn, right? You get, like, I actually really recommend doing evaluations just even as a way of understanding, LLMs and AI applications better, and getting a better intuitive feel for what matters and what doesn't matter, and the kind of differences that you can see between things, right? And I think it gives you a deeper understanding. So certainly, yeah, you could try, so here I'm using a GPT-4 as my evaluator. But I could try using like a GPT-4o. I could try using an 01 that just came out. If once that's available on Azure, I don't know if it is yet. I could try using GPT-4o Mini. You generally want to use a pretty powerful model for your evaluation. I don't know if we have good statistics about which ones you definitely can use and which ones you definitely can't. I've always used GPT-4 for all my evaluations, and I'll probably keep using it until I get told that, it seems like there's a better model that we should be using. And then Blarby says, do you have any experience with NVIDIA Nemo as a guardrail for your RAG chat? I have not. I haven't gotten a chance to use any of the NVIDIA stuff yet. I actually did chat with someone from NVIDIA who is working on the Azure Search OpenAI demo and adding some NVIDIA stuff to it. So maybe that's something they could try out and see how it works. I just use the Azure OpenAI models, which do have content safety and jailbreak detection built in. So I do benefit from the content safety filters and the jailbreak, and that works pretty well. Also, I should mention there are also evaluators for content safety. So there is a violence evaluator, harmfulness. So if you have concerned that some questions could result in content safety violations, you could specifically run those evaluators as well. If you're dealing with a domain with particularly sensitive questions or whatnot. So they do also have all the content safety evaluators are also available in this SDK too. And then Hella asked, could evaluation be done with a small LLM model hosted in a private cloud? And do I have any recommendations? Generally, I don't think you'd want to do evaluation with a small model unless it was specifically a model that was designed for evaluation. Just because I'm saying we do need really, really good models to be able to run these things. There even is I did read the research paper where this whole notion of using GPTs to judge came about, and they specifically looked at even GPT 3.5 for GPT 4. And even GPT 3.5 isn't considered a good enough judge, right? So if GPT 3.5 is not a good enough judge, then I would be really surprised if we could use a local model. I mean, if it's all you have access to, you could certainly try it. One thing also to keep in mind is that when I get these scores back from the evaluators, I look at them in terms of their relative differences, right? So if I see a 5, I don't presume that actually means that the answer was grounded. I think okay, well, it thinks it's grounded. If I change this parameter, does the groundedness go down? So I only look at relative differences. That's all I think is, that's all I have faith in, is relative differences. I don't actually think that 5 means that it's a perfect answer. I don't believe that, right? I don't think we're at the point where we get, the LLMs are perfect judges. However, I do think that when you change a parameter and you see a marked increase or decrease in one of these scores, then that does indicate something has changed, right? That there's a significant change in quality, right? So 5 may not mean this is definitely grounded, but if you see a jump from 5 to 1 and you see that jump across a bunch of QA pairs, then something happened. Something is worse in your setup. So that's what you should pay attention to. So in that case, maybe you can use a smaller model for evaluation if you're at least seeing consistency with the relative scores. Yeah, I think if you can go big, it's better to use the bigger model. Yeah, we have some questions. Yeah, Llama 3.1 as a judge. Yeah, I think you could maybe use the 3.1405B model, because that's considered pretty I think it's on par with the other large frontier models, but probably not the 8B model. All right. Okay, so there's one more question. Is it still RAG if you tell users to chat with their document, if they can upload your documents, you use the document for RAG or not? So anything is RAG if it asks the user to ask the app to answer a question based off of context. So that context might come from a search index, or it might come from a just uploaded document, right? Or it could even come from a web search. That's all RAG, right? So you're where you got the context from is different. But the flow is a RAG flow, right? So you could still evaluate whether it did a good job. Now, the cool thing is when you're doing RAG on a just uploaded document, you pretty much know your retrieval is great because you have that whole document there, right? So then you can really focus on on the rest of it, like the LLM step, because you've got that whole document there, and it's usually just about what happens after that. Cool. Okay, so I want to show the tool that I actually use, that it builds on top of the Promptflow Evals SDK, and this is the kind of workflow that I've come up with that helps me. So it's a command line tools that help me through the whole process of setting up an evaluation, and hopefully it's useful for you to figure out how to make workflows for you as well. So this RAG chat evaluator, there's a repo for it, so we can post that repo in the chat. So aka.ms/rag/eval, that'll take you to the AI RAG chat evaluator repo, and this repo contains a bunch of command line tools written in Python, and they cover kind of the steps of evaluation. So the first step of generating ground truth data, then the next step of running an evaluation, and then finally comparing the evaluation metrics across evaluations. So the first step is generating ground truth data. Now, ideally, if you could, it would be great if you could have a human come up with all of that ground truth data. But that's a lot of work to write, at least 200 question answer pairs, right? So what most folks do is they do use an LLM to generate QA pairs based off of their, the document store, and then use a human to curate that, and then add to that over time with good examples that they've got from actual users, right? So in this repo, I've got a script that, will take in an Azure AI search index, and then it will, generate however many questions you want and however many questions per source, and then we'll output that into a result, right? So I can show you what the results look like, right? So for my blog, right? So here, let me do a little word wrap action. Okay. Right. So this is what it comes up with. So, here, like what does the author do on their BART commute? And here we see the truth, right? It says the author is interested in reducing the number of concepts their mind encounters each day. This was after a Buddhist retreat that I did. And then it has the citation, right? So this is nice because I've got example questions people might ask, of my blog, and then the truth according to that blog post, and then a citation for that blog post. Now, one issue with this ground truth data is that it doesn't have examples of answers across multiple blog posts, and a lot of questions actually would have answers across multiple blog posts. So I haven't quite figured out a great way of doing that. Like I like randomly putting together different blog posts and asking for generated questions. So this sort of ground truth is a great start. But you definitely want to add to this with things that are more reflective of actual user questions to make sure that your ground truth is corresponding to the kind of things users are actually asking. But yeah, so you can see lots of questions and truth, and the truth is formatted the way that my RAG app wants it to be formatted. Road Lake asks, can the citations be hallucinated and bad? In the ground truth data, they can't, because I'm literally, I'll show you the code for this. I am literally adding it myself, right? So I just say answer plus citation, right? So I generate it based off the document, and then I just write it out with the answer and the citation. That's a good question. Yeah, because I guess I could have asked the LLM to come up with a citation. Yeah, great point. So in my code, I am actually specifically adding the citation manually to that to make sure it's exactly the right format that I want. And I didn't actually ask the LLM in this case to make the citation. So yeah, it's a good point. You definitely want the citations in your ground truth data to be correct. And that's because actually in your actual RAG application, yes, definitely I have seen LLMs make up citations. Most of the times the bigger issue is that they forget to do the citation or they do it in the wrong format. But I have seen a few times that they have, made up a citation. So that's why I think it's really important to check to see if citations are matching what you expect them to match. All right, so then we've got our generated data and it's saying, we usually want to have at least like 200 question answer pairs. The next step is to run an evaluation. So the way I've set this up is that I have this, kind of config file. And in this config file, I say, okay, this is the input. So this is the ground truth data. That's, what I just showed. Here is where I'm going to store the results for this run. Here are the metrics I'm going to look at. So here I've got groundedness, relevance, coherence, similarity. So these are all ones that are built in to that SDK that we saw before. And then I have some additional metrics. So I have other metrics that I've defined in my code base here, like answer length. So that's just literally how many characters long is the answer. Latency, which is how long did this request take? And then has citation, which is, does it have a citation in brackets? And then I have another one, which is actually my favorite one, which is citation match. And that one will check to see like, hey, does the citation in the new answer match the citation in the ground truth? And so these metrics here, I've implemented all of them just using code. So they're actually pretty cheap metrics to run. And they're actually some of my favorite metrics. So answer length, that's really easy. But let's look like has citation is like, does it have something that looks like a citation? But I'm saying my favorite one actually uses regular expressions. And, it's just checking to see like, okay, let's look at all the answers in the citations in the ground truth. Let's look at all the citations in the answer. And in this case, we're going to give it a true if the if all the citations in the truth are present in the answer. Now the answer might have some additional citations, and I decided that was, you know, okay in this, for this metric. You know, it's up to you, right? So you could make up your own, you know, your own metrics, whatever you think is relevant for your evaluation. But this to me is actually the most useful metric that I have, and it's a regex. So it's great. So yeah, so we get these custom metrics here, and you know, we can include those. So here we can get quite a few metrics. Then it's our target URL. So here I'm pointing at just a locally running app, but I could also point this at a deployed endpoint if it was, you know, publicly available, or one that was like running, you know, on a CI or something. And then I have all the parameters that get sent in the post. So these are parameters that our app expects whenever you make a chat request to it, right? So these are just all the defaults, and I could change these, and you can see these very much correspond to what I was tweaking in that developer settings, right? So these are all the defaults, but if I wanted to change something like the temperature, you know, I would just change it here. And then I just have to tell it where to find the answer. So this is like a configuration. So then once I have this configuration, then I can go ahead and, you know, run it. So again, it's evaluate, and let's see, config equals example config.json. And then a lot of times I just run it just on like one question at the beginning, just to make sure that it's working, right? And then after I've done like a test run, then I'll, you know, run it on, you know, the full 200. Now it definitely takes some time to run the full 200. So I did it earlier today just to make sure it works. And I actually did it. It was good. I did a test on GPT-4o mini because I've been curious. Let me find the results. Sorry, I was doing some debugging here too. Let me find the run I did earlier. Okay, here we go. So that was when I did the full evaluation. But here you can see it's doing one now too. So, you know, it checks to make sure that the chat app is running and that it can do a sample request, checks to make sure that our GPT-4 deployment is running, and then it starts doing the actual evaluation. So what it's going to do is for every, you know, each of the questions in the ground truth data set, it's going to send that question to the running RAG application, run the metrics for that question on the answer that it got, and then save them out. So in this case, I only ran it on one question to make it run really fast, but I could run it on the full 200 if I want to have a full run. So if we look at that, you know, we can see now that there's a new directory here, and we can see that one run, right? So it had a question. This was the truth that came from the ground truth. This was the new answer that it got from the running RAG application, which took a lot longer. And then this was the context that it got back from the application. And then these are all the metrics, right? So we can see the latency, the groundedness, relevance, coherence, similarity, answer length, has citation, and citation match, which was actually false in this case, which is interesting. So normally we would have all 200 question answer pairs evaluated in a normal run. So let me delete that one just because it's not a full run. But that shows you, you know, what the kind of evaluation run would look like. So the next step is to review the results. So these are another set of command line tools that I wrote, and these is using Textual, which is a Python tool that you can use to make command line apps, and it's pretty powerful, like what kind of command line apps you can make with it. So here I'm going to run the summary tool, and I'll do it for my example results. So that's on the example data from the HR handbooks. So here you can see a bunch of runs, and look at this one that I did today. GPT-4o mini has 5s like almost across the board. So it got an average rating of 5 for groundedness, average of 5 for relevance, 4.97 for coherence, but that's actually the metric I care like the least about. I even did similarity. So it got 3.81. That's the highest similarity I've ever seen. Answer length of 717. That's a reasonable length, not too short, not too long. Has citation 100%, and then we got latency. So GPT-4o mini did just really, really well. So I think I'm going to do another run just to compare it once more time to baseline. But that looks really good, right? So this is the kind of reason that, like, this is why I run evaluations, right? Like, people are saying like, hey, do you think we should like switch over from 3.5 turbo to 4.0 mini? And I'm like, well, I don't know. Like, I want to know if it's actually going to be better across the board. But this is really, really compelling here, seeing these kind of, I was saying like the relative numbers are, what matters. Like, I don't think seeing 5 average necessarily means the answers are perfect, but seeing that it's getting an average of 5 compared to, a baseline of 4.9, then that's a really useful signal to see here. For each of these, I can go ahead and like look at the settings that I used. So that's really helpful. Now, when you're looking at these runs, you see like the overall numbers, but you might think like, well, what's the actual difference between these runs, right? Like what changed between them? Like, when you see numbers go up and maybe some numbers go down, like how do you reason about why something changed? So that's why I like to look at the differences between just individual answers to get a feel for what something did better or worse at. So, with that, then I look at like, let me see. Okay, so I have my diff tool here, right? So this diff is for comparing 2 different runs, right? So here I can compare answers, and let me show what I used here. I actually specifically said, show me answers where the citation match metric changed. So I want to see for this metric that changed, any answers that changed with this metric, what was the difference, right? And here we can actually see that there was an OpenAI error. I was like, okay, well, fine, I'll fix my OpenAI error. But here, we can see an actual like difference, like where this answer was actually better. So I was like, okay, well, that's interesting. That one was better. This one was better, right? So I can kind of look at these, especially ones like where you get like some metrics higher and some metrics lower. You can look at them and say like, oh, okay, well, I see that one, that one was better, that one was worse. And then you can kind of get a feel for in what ways it gets better or worse. So it's this I find really helpful to be able to do. There's another like OpenAI error there, but it's just really, really interesting to see the ways in which things can change over runs here. All right, let's see. Oh, so we're getting close to the end here, so I should go faster. So this is the diff tool, right? So saying we can diff 2 runs, and we can specifically look only at things that changed by a particular metric, and that I find quite helpful. So general approach is we want to evaluate at least 200 QA pairs. We want to start by evaluating the baseline so that we know what the the metrics are for what our current settings are. And then for any setting we want to change, only change that setting, make sure we're using seed or evaluate multiple times, and then, compare them, right? So before we had seed, I would run each of these experiments 3 times and be able to like compare between all the 3. And you want to be able to see these evaluation results, track them somewhere so that you can see how things change over time. Now, a final point I want to make is that, these things here are all evaluating questions where we think the RAG should have an answer, right? So these ones are all questions that should have an answer. But another thing that we often want out of a RAG app is the ability for the RAG app to say it doesn't know. We want it to admit that the answer is not in the sources. And that's actually like really, really hard for RAG apps to admit that sometimes, right? Because LLMs really like to be helpful. They like to have an answer, and they don't like to say that they don't know, right? So I went on a whole quest to figure out how could I evaluate this. So I added a new generate function, which generates questions that shouldn't be knowable based off of a particular data set. It's really tricky to figure out how to come up with that, but I made my best approach there. Then I added a new don't knowness metric. So I can show you what a don't knowness, this is my promptee for don't knowness, right? So I say, this is the metric. This is what 1 star to 5 stars means. Here's some examples, right? And you can see that 5 says, I'm sorry, I don't know. The answer is not in my sources. So that is what we want. That should get a 5, right? So that's my don't knowness metric. And then I have the results. And this was really, really interesting. I tried all these different prompts. Like I tried like 10 different prompts. I deleted most of them, but I tried so many different prompts. And really the thing that made a difference was just changing from GPT-3.5 to GPT-4, right? Like once I changed to GPT-3 to 4, I got better results, right? Where it was more okay with saying it didn't know. But not all the time. Like sometimes GPT-4 would like, there are times when GPT-4 would claim it knew something it shouldn't. So this is a really interesting thing to investigate as well. So if it is important for your RAG app to admit it doesn't know, then you also want to consider having a separate flow all about these, unknowable answers. All right, so let me just talk about continuous evaluation, and then we can look at any questions that are left, right? So, we talked about, you make your app, you do manual experimentation, you do evaluation, to figure out the right parameters, and then you go live with your app, right? And there's still more you can do once you go live to your app, because then you've actually got like users using it, and you're seeing while they're using it, and you can actually do evaluation at that point too, right? So you could do online evaluation, which means that you're actually running evaluations on the QA pairs that come out of actually users using it. Now, those ones you can't do with ground truth because you don't have ground truth for them, because users are asking, all sorts of new things. But, there's lots of evaluators that you could run just to see generally how things are going, right? Are things looking good? Are you seeing any regressions? Like if you made any significant change and you're seeing this regression, right? So once again, like it's about the relative scores, right? If you're seeing that scores are going, way down after a particular change, well, that's a signal that you need to look into stuff, right? So you can run online evaluations, and that can be really helpful. You can also use that, production information to improve your ground truth data sets, right? One of the best ways of doing this is having like thumbs down buttons and seeing what answers people aren't liking, and then figuring out what the answer should have been and putting that into your ground truth data set and trying to improve those answers there, right? So that can really help your ground truth data sets to be to be closer to what the users are experiencing. All right, so those are what I have in the slides. I see there's a few more questions. So let's see. Blarby asked, how do you deal with multilingual input? So Blarby had some issues trying to make an evaluator with input questions could be in different languages. Yeah, that's a good question. So that's actually part of the reason that I put all the prompts. So I even put the coherence and groundedness and prompty prompts in here. Like if you were, because there was somebody who was using this and they were evaluating a Brazilian Portuguese RAG. So they, were getting kind of mixed results. So they ended up I think they translated these into Portuguese and got better results that way. So that would be one approach, is that, to actually make sure your evaluation prompts are written in that language. Now you're saying multi-language. So if the input questions could be in different languages, you may want to just make English be the common language there if the answers are in English, and then like do a translation. So I haven't dealt with that in particular, but it's a very good question. And I think it's something we need to get better at, is multilingual evaluation, because so many of our tools are defaulting to, English prompts and generating like English data sets and stuff like that. But, we're developing RAG for all over the world. So, I'm hoping that we get better as a whole at internationalization and supporting the international RAGs as well. Let's see. Nam asks, do you have any recommendations what to put or not put in the system prompt if we want the model to respond in a certain way? Yeah, that's really interesting, because I have evaluated lots and lots of prompts. So you can see like there was a bunch I was trying to do to get it to, like admit it doesn't know. And like, I tried like this. I've tried a bunch of them. The interesting thing is I find that generally all that matters in the prompt is, making sure it knows that it's supposed to adhere to the sources, telling it what its citation format should be, and like really making sure it understands the citation format. So like stuff about syntax. But anything that was like trying to like say like, oh, you should be really helpful or something like that. I don't know, like the fluffy stuff just didn't matter, right? Like if I even did a test with like, do I have this one still, like with the most basic prompt, right? Just the most basic prompt. I don't think I have that one anymore. General prompt, maybe. Yeah, here you go. You are a helpful assistant. Even with that one, I actually got pretty good results. The only thing that was wrong with their citations, right? So that was really, really interesting to me. So that's saying, like, when you do these evaluations, you'll start to see like what matters and what doesn't. So even with you're a helpful assistant, honestly, like the results were pretty good. So what mattered to me was the citation format. So that's what I, focus on in my prompts. Let's see. Okay. All right. Okay. Well, we are getting to the last minute. So let me go ahead and wrap up. And if there are additional questions, go ahead. You can post it in the GitHub discussion thread, and I'm happy to answer additional questions there so we can keep the conversation going. But let's talk about RagHack next steps. This is our final English stream for RagHack. So, we hope that a bunch of you are excited about actually hacking and submitting. If you missed any of our earlier streams, they're all recorded. You can check them all out. You can get the slides. You can get the links. They're all linked from our RagHack repo. And if you're keen to actually hack and submit to our hackathon, like this is a great time to do that. You have 4 days to do your hack. And you can start from our existing code samples and just make some tweaks, or you can start from scratch, whatever you can get done in the next 4 days. And make sure that you submit your project before September 16th at 11:59 p.m. PT. And if you do that, then you'll be eligible for one of our 10 cash prizes in 10 different categories, $500 each. You can learn more on aka.ms/raghack. And we're just looking forward to seeing all the hacks that you all come up with. All right, so that's what I have for you today. Please do post any questions I missed in that discussion thread, and I will respond there. And look forward to seeing your hacks and seeing you in future streams way off in the future. Bye, everyone.